We were sitting in our favorite booth at Murphy's Diner in downtown Portland, sharing a plate of their famous apple pie. The rain was doing its typical Pacific Northwest dance against the windows, creating that cozy atmosphere that made Sunday brunches feel like a sacred ritual. It was our tradition. Every Sunday for the past 3 years, we'd come here, order the same things. She always got the smoked salmon Benedict. I always got the steel-cut oats with berries, and then walk through Pioneer Courthouse Square regardless of weather. Jessica was scrolling through her phone, occasionally showing me memes that made her laugh. Mostly stuff from her graphic design Instagram accounts. The kind of content that spoke to creative types who spent their days dealing with impossible client requests and last-minute changes to projects that had been final 3 revisions ago. Everything felt normal, comfortable, routine. The kind of routine that feels like home. Then she put her phone down and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not quite serious, not quite sad, but something in between that made my engineering brain immediately start running diagnostics. In my line of work as a process improvement consultant, you learn to read facial expressions like system alerts, subtle changes that indicate something in the underlying architecture is about to fail. "Ryan," she said, pushing the pie plate to the side with deliberate precision, "we need to talk about us." I set my fork down and gave her my full attention. When someone prefaces a conversation with, "we need to talk," you're about to receive critical data about system failures you might not have detected yet. In 3 years together, Jessica had never used those words. Not once. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she continued, fidgeting with her coffee cup in that way she did when she was nervous about presenting a design to a particularly difficult client. "About our relationship, about where we're headed, about what we both want." She paused, took a deep breath that seemed to require significant processing power, and delivered what would later prove to be the most significant input I'd ever received in my personal operating system. "I care about you, Ryan. I really do. You're wonderful and stable, and you make me feel safe. You're probably the best man I've ever dated, but I'm not in love with you anymore. I haven't been for a while, and I think I need to be honest about that." The words hit me like a failed stress test on a critical component. Not a catastrophic system failure that would bring everything crashing down immediately, but a clear indication that the specifications had fundamentally changed and the current configuration was no longer viable for long-term operation. I sat there for a moment, processing. Jessica was looking at me expectantly, probably anticipating an emotional overflow, system alerts, maybe even a complete shutdown. Her eyes had that careful, guarded look of someone who had rehearsed this conversation multiple times and was prepared for various response scenarios. Instead, my brain simply cataloged the information and filed it appropriately under relationship status change requires protocol adjustment. "Okay," I said finally, my voice steady. "Thank you for telling me." She blinked, clearly surprised by my response. This was obviously not scenario A from her mental rehearsals. "That's it? That's all you have to say?" "What would you like me to say?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You've provided me with important information about the current state of our relationship. I'm processing it." "I just thought," she stammered. "I mean, don't you want to know why? Don't you want to fight for us? Ask me what changed or what you could do differently?" I considered this carefully, the way I'd analyze any business problem. Would fighting change how you feel? Well, but then it would be an inefficient use of resources, I concluded. You've conducted your own internal assessment and reached a conclusion about your emotional state. I respect that analysis. I signaled the waitress for the check. Jessica just sat there, staring at me like I was a computer that had just blue screened in the middle of an important presentation. Except instead of crashing, I had simply displayed a message that said, "Acknowledgement received. System updating. Please wait." The drive back to our apartment in the Pearl District was quiet, except for the rain and the occasional swish of windshield wipers. Jessica kept glancing at me, clearly expecting some kind of delayed emotional response. The anger, the hurt, the desperate bargaining that she'd prepared herself to handle. But here's the thing about being a process improvement consultant. You learn to separate emotional reactions from logical analysis. Emotions are important data points, but they shouldn't drive decision-making processes. That evening, as we settled into our usual spots on the couch, she curled up on the left side with her laptop, me stretched out on the right with my tablet, watching our Sunday night Netflix routine. Jessica seemed almost cheerful, relieved even. She'd successfully delivered difficult news without the messy consequences she'd been dreading. She'd managed to downgrade our relationship status without losing any of the benefits of our shared life. It was actually quite brilliant from an efficiency standpoint. She got to keep the apartment, which she could never afford on her freelance graphic designer income. The lifestyle, the emotional support, the financial stability, and the general convenience of having a devoted partner while shedding what she apparently saw as the burden of reciprocal romantic feelings. She'd essentially renegotiated our contract terms entirely in her favor. What she didn't realize was that she just triggered my professional instincts. When someone presents you with an inefficient system, particularly one where resource allocation is severely imbalanced, you don't fight it, you optimize it. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Jessica breathe beside me, I began formulating what I would later call the roommate optimization protocol. She had clearly defined the new parameters of our relationship. I was simply going to implement them with maximum efficiency and logical consistency. The man who was in love with Jessica had operated under a certain set of assumptions and behaviors designed around building a shared future, providing emotional and financial support, and prioritizing her needs alongside his own. That man was now obsolete. Time for a complete system upgrade. I spent the next few hours lying there in the dark, designing the new operational framework. Jessica had been very clear about what she wanted. All the benefits of our relationship without the obligation to love me back. The logical response was to provide exactly that, but with the precision that comes from treating it as a business arrangement rather than a romantic partnership. Update 1. Week 1 implementation. The roommate optimization protocol went live on Monday morning at 6:30 a.m. sharp. For the past 3 years, my morning routine had been a carefully choreographed dance of devotion. Wake up, kiss Jessica good morning while she was still half asleep. Make coffee for both of us, hers with oat milk and exactly 1 teaspoon of maple syrup. Prepare her overnight oats the way she liked them, with extra cinnamon and those ridiculously expensive organic blueberries from Whole Foods. Check the weather and lay out an appropriate jacket if it looked like rain. And always ask about her plans for the day so I could coordinate my schedule around any support she might need. The new protocol was significantly more streamlined. I woke up at my usual time, completed my personal hygiene routine, and headed directly to the kitchen. I made exactly 1 cup of coffee using my French press, single origin Colombian beans that I bought in bulk for cost efficiency. I prepared my own breakfast, steel-cut oats with protein powder, and whatever fruit was currently the best value at the grocery store. I ate while reviewing my schedule on my tablet and checking industry news. When Jessica emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, hair tousled and wearing one of my old MIT t-shirts that she'd claimed as sleepwear, she found me rinsing my dishes and preparing to leave. "Good morning," I said pleasantly, checking my watch. "I'm heading out in 5 minutes. Have a productive day." She stood there in the doorway, looking confused. "Where's my coffee?" "Oh," I said, as if just remembering something minor. "The French press is right there if you'd like some. I only made enough for myself since I wasn't sure if you'd want any." I could see her processing this information. For 3 years, I had never, not once, failed to make her coffee. It was such a small thing, but it was apparently a thing she'd come to expect from the man who loved her. It was part of the basic service package. The roommate, however, makes his own coffee and manages his own morning routine. "But you always make my coffee," she said, still not quite understanding the system change. "I did," I agreed cheerfully, "when we were in a romantic relationship. But since we've redefined our arrangement, I figured you prefer the independence. Plus, you know how you like it better than I do." I said it with a smile, completely matter of fact, the way you might explain a new office policy to a coworker. Friendly, helpful, but not personal. The first few days, Jessica seemed to think this was great. She started making her own coffee, humming while she did it, seeming lighter and more carefree. She'd successfully extracted herself from what she perceived as the emotional obligations of love without losing her roommate benefits, or so she thought. The protocol included several other key optimizations. Transportation services restructuring. Previously, I had been her default ride to and from work, social events, appointments, grocery runs, and anywhere else she needed to go. This made sense when we were partners building a life together. Transportation was shared infrastructure. As roommates, however, we each handle our own mobility needs. On Wednesday, she texted me at 3 p.m. "Hey babe, my car's at the shop and Sarah canceled on me. Can you pick me up from work? I can be ready by 5:30. I was in the middle of a client meeting about supply chain optimization when the text came through. I responded during our break. "Sorry, I have CrossFit after work tonight, and then dinner with my college roommate Mike. Maybe try Uber or the Max line. The blue line stops right by your building and goes straight to our neighborhood." She texted back 3 question marks in a row. I didn't respond immediately because I was busy, and besides, I'd already provided a solution to her transportation problem. When I got home that evening around 9 p.m., I found her sitting on the couch looking distinctly annoyed. "I had to take a $40 Uber home," she announced. "That's rough," I said with genuine sympathy. "Did you consider the Max? It's only $2.50 and probably would have been faster with evening traffic." "I don't know how to use public transit." "It's actually pretty straightforward," I offered. There are apps that show you exactly which train to take. I could show you how to use them sometime if you'd like. I was being helpful. I was offering to teach her a valuable life skill. I just wasn't dropping everything to solve her problems for her anymore. The boyfriend would have left his workout and his social plans to pick her up. The roommate offers practical advice and emotional support. Household management delegation. This was where the efficiency gains really started to show. I had previously handled all apartment-related tasks, lease negotiations, utility management, maintenance scheduling, grocery shopping, meal planning, and general household administration. This was clearly an inefficient distribution of labor between two capable adults. When our internet went down on Thursday, Jessica called me at work. "Ryan, the Wi-Fi is completely out. I can't work from home like this. Can you call Xfinity?" "I'm in back-to-back meetings until 4, I replied, checking my calendar. "Since this is affecting your workday, would you mind handling it? You'll probably need to call from your cell phone since they'll want to walk you through some troubleshooting steps." There was a pause. "But I don't know anything about our internet setup. The account is under my name, but I can call them during my lunch break to add you as an authorized user. Then you can handle the technical support. They're usually pretty good about walking you through everything step by step. But I need internet today." "That sounds really frustrating," I said with the kind of genuine sympathy you'd offer a coworker dealing with a technical issue. "Maybe see if you can work from one of those coffee shops you like. I know the Stumptown on Division has excellent Wi-Fi and good seating, or the library has free internet and quiet workspaces." I was being helpful. I was providing multiple solutions. I just wasn't dropping my professional responsibilities to solve her problem for her. The boyfriend would have called in sick to work to deal with the internet issue. The roommate offers suggestions, resources, and appropriate support. Financial integration optimization. This represented perhaps the most significant change in our operational structure. In 3 years together, Jessica had never paid for a date. Not once. I handled all entertainment expenses, travel costs, dining out, weekend activities, concert tickets, movie tickets, and generally anything fun we did together. This made sense when we were building a shared life with combined financial goals. As roommates, the financial arrangement needed to reflect actual usage and mutual benefit. On Friday night, she suggested we try the new sushi place that had opened in the Southeast Division area, the one that had been getting rave reviews on her food Instagram accounts. "Sounds great," I said, genuinely interested. "Want to split the bill, or would you prefer to handle it separately?" She looked at me like I'd suggested we pay in cryptocurrency or communicate entirely through interpretive dance. "Split it?" she asked, as if the concept was completely foreign. "Well, yeah, that's what friends do, right? Or if you prefer, we can each pay for our own orders. Whatever works better for your budget." She stared at me for a long moment. I could practically see the calculations running in her head. When was the last time she'd paid for her own meal at a restaurant? Had she ever? "I think I'll just stay in tonight," she said finally. "I have some leftover Thai food in the fridge." "No problem," I replied. "I might still check it out. Mike's been wanting to try it too, and he's usually up for sushi." So I went to the new sushi place with my college roommate Mike, who was fascinated by my relationship status update. Over excellent Nigerian sake, I explained the new operational framework. "So let me get this straight," Mike said, using his chopsticks to examine a piece of yellowtail. "She told you she's not in love with you, but wants to keep living together and maintaining the relationship?" "Essentially, yes. She wants all the infrastructure and support systems without the emotional component." "And your response is to give her exactly that?" "Precisely. She's defined the parameters. I'm optimizing within them." Mike laughed and shook his head. "Dude, that's either brilliant or completely psychotic. I can't tell which. Why can't it be both?" Meanwhile, Jessica was at home eating leftover pad thai and probably wondering why her brilliant strategy was producing unexpected results. By Sunday, exactly 1 week after her declaration of not being in love with me, the cracks in her plan were starting to show. Jessica kept trying to initiate conversations about us, but there was no us anymore in the way she meant. There were just two people who shared living space and occasionally watched Netflix together, like friendly roommates might. She'd bring up memories from our relationship, and I'd respond with the mild interest you'd show someone sharing stories about their ex. Polite engagement, but no emotional investment. "Remember that weekend we drove to Cannon Beach and got caught in that crazy storm?" she said wistfully while we were both in the kitchen Sunday morning. She was making her coffee, a skill she'd rapidly mastered out of necessity, and I was preparing my weekly meal prep. "That sounds like it was a nice trip," I replied while portioning out chicken breast into containers. "I love that area. The hiking trails around Ecola State Park are incredible, and the views from the lighthouse are amazing." I wasn't dismissing the memory or being cruel about it. I just wasn't treating it as our shared romantic history anymore. It was just information about a place I'd been once, like if a coworker mentioned they'd had a good vacation somewhere. The look on her face was fascinating from a psychological standpoint. She was starting to realize that her brilliant strategy had some unintended consequences she hadn't accounted for in her planning. Over the next few days, she began testing the boundaries of the new system, probably trying to figure out where the old Ryan was hiding and how to access him. She'd leave messes in common areas, seemingly to see if I'd clean them up the way I used to. I didn't. I'd simply work around them, or pile her items neatly on her side of whatever space we were sharing. She'd play music loudly in the living room, usually sad songs that seemed designed to evoke some kind of emotional response. I'd put in my noise-canceling headphones and continue with whatever I was doing. She'd mentioned being cold while we were watching TV, the way she used to when she wanted me to offer her my sweatshirt or suggest we cuddle under a blanket. I'd say, "There are extra blankets in the hall closet," and continue watching the show. Each test produced the same result: polite, helpful, emotionally neutral responses. I was consistently pleasant and considerate, but I was no longer emotionally invested in her comfort, her problems, or her happiness beyond the level you'd maintain with any friendly roommate. By the end of the second week, I could see her starting to panic, though she was trying to hide it. Update 2, Month 1, Deep Dive Analysis. 30 days into the roommate optimization protocol, and the results are exceeding all projected outcomes. Jessica's carefully calculated risk-reward analysis has backfired so spectacularly that it's become a fascinating case study in unintended consequences. What she thought was a masterstroke of emotional manipulation, keeping all the benefits while eliminating the obligations, has turned into a slow-motion disaster as she discovers that those benefits weren't features of our living arrangement. They were features of being loved by someone. The birthday test was particularly illuminating from a behavioral analysis perspective. Jessica's birthday was 2 weeks ago, March 15th, a date I had circled on my calendar for months in previous years. Historically, I went completely overboard. Last year, I'd planned a surprise weekend trip to wine country, complete with reservations at her favorite bed and breakfast, a private tasting at 3 different vineyards, and dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Napa. The year before, I'd thrown an elaborate surprise party with all her friends, hired her favorite local band to play, and spent weeks coordinating with everyone to make sure it was perfect. This year I woke up, saw her stirring in bed, and said, "Happy birthday, Jess. Hope it's a good one." Then I got up and started my normal routine. She lay there for a full minute, clearly waiting for phase 2 of the celebration to begin. The breakfast in bed, the mysteriously delivered flowers, the casual suggestion that she dressed nicely because we had errands to run that would actually be surprise activities. Nothing materialized. I brushed my teeth, got dressed, and made my coffee and breakfast. When she finally came to the kitchen, I was packing my lunch for work and reviewing my schedule. "So," she said carefully, like she was approaching a potentially dangerous animal, "any special plans today?" "It's Tuesday," I said, checking my calendar app. "I've got the Morrison Bridge Infrastructure Project review at 9, lunch with the Port Authority client at noon, and CrossFit at 6. Pretty standard day. How about you? Anything fun planned?" "It's my birthday," she said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. "Right, that's why I wished you a happy birthday," I replied cheerfully. "Are you doing anything special? Meeting up with Sarah and the girls?" The logic was flawless. Romantic birthdays with surprise trips and elaborate celebrations are for romantic partners. Friend birthdays get well wishes and maybe a casual suggestion to hang out if schedules align. She had explicitly told me we weren't romantic partners anymore. I was treating her exactly the way she'd requested to be treated. She spent her birthday evening sitting on our couch scrolling through Instagram while I worked on process documentation for a client. She was watching all her friends post, "Happy birthday, Queen," in another year of fabulousness. Messages while not one of them had actually made plans with her. Apparently, they all assumed I was handling the celebration the way I had for the past 3 years. Around 9 p.m., she finally cracked. "This is the worst birthday I've ever had," she announced, her voice thick with suppressed tears. I looked up from my laptop with genuine concern. "I'm sorry to hear that. What happened? Did something go wrong?" "Nothing happened. That's the problem." "Oh," I said, nodding understandingly. "You were hoping for something more special than a regular Tuesday?" "Of course I was." "That makes complete sense," I agreed. "Birthdays should definitely be special occasions. Did you make reservations somewhere? Plan something with your friends?" She just stared at me, and I could see the exact moment she realized what had happened. The man who used to plan her birthdays 2 months in advance, who had spreadsheets tracking her favorite restaurants and a running list of gift ideas based on things she mentioned throughout the year, was sitting 3 feet away, asking her why she hadn't planned her own celebration. "You used to plan my birthdays," she said quietly. "I did," I acknowledged. "When I was in love with you and we were building a life together. But you told me you weren't in love with me anymore, so I assumed you'd prefer to handle your own social calendar. I didn't want to overstep or make you feel obligated to include me in your celebrations. The financial reality has also started to hit with increasing force. Jessica had been living a lifestyle that was significantly subsidized by someone who was emotionally invested in her happiness. The grocery bills, the dinners out, the streaming service subscriptions, the weekend trips, the concert tickets. All of that had been coming out of my budget because we were building a shared future. Now we're splitting expenses the way actual roommates do. Her car registration renewal notice came last week. She brought it to me with that expectant look she used to get when she needed me to handle administrative tasks. The same expression she'd wear when handing me bills to pay or forms to fill out. "Can you take care of this?" she asked, holding out the DMV paperwork. "Sure," I said. "Do you want to Venmo me the registration fee now, or should I add it to your half of this month's shared expenses?" "My half?" "Well, it's your car," I pointed out reasonably. "I don't drive it." She stared at the paper like it was written in ancient Sumerian. She had never, not once in 3 years, paid her own car registration. She had never paid her own car insurance, handled her own oil changes, or dealt with any vehicle maintenance. She had never even pumped her own gas if I was in the car with her. These weren't conscious decisions I'd made to control her or make her dependent. They were just things you do when you love someone. You take care of the boring administrative stuff so they don't have to worry about it. You handle the tedious parts of adult life so they can focus on their creative work and the things that make them happy. But roommates? Roommates handle their own paperwork. The grocery situation has become particularly fascinating to observe. I now shop exclusively for myself, using the same systematic approach I apply to business operations. I buy exactly what I need for my weekly meal prep, stick to my predetermined list, shop once per week at the same store during off-peak hours, and spend approximately $65 on high-quality, nutritionally optimized food. Jessica, meanwhile, has discovered that her previous grocery habits were completely unsustainable on a single income. She had been living off my Costco runs, my bulk meal prep, and my tendency to maintain a fully stocked kitchen with backup supplies of everything. Now she's shopping for one person who doesn't plan meals in advance, doesn't buy in bulk, has expensive taste in organic specialty items, and needs to purchase food more frequently because she doesn't have storage space or containers for larger quantities. Last week, she came home with 2 bags of groceries and a receipt for $127. "How do you only spend $65? She asked, looking at her receipt with genuine confusion and dismay. "Meal prep and bulk purchasing," I said, continuing to portion out my prepared meals into labeled containers. "Plus, I buy generic brands for most staple items, and I don't purchase prepared foods or restaurants' quality ingredients for home cooking. But I don't have time to meal prep." "That's a completely valid choice," I said. "Convenience costs more. That's just basic economics." I wasn't being condescending or trying to prove a point. I was stating objective facts. She was learning, in real time, the actual financial cost of independence and convenience. The most interesting development has been watching her attempts to recreate the emotional intimacy we used to have. She started trying to initiate our old routines. Movie nights, where she'd curl up against me on the couch. Morning conversations over coffee, where we'd share our plans and thoughts for the day. Debriefing sessions in the evening, where we'd talk through the challenges and successes of our respective workdays. But I respond to all of it with the pleasant interest of a friendly roommate who happens to share living space with her. When she tells me about drama at the graphic design agency where she freelances, clients who change their minds after final approval, coworkers who take credit for her ideas, project managers who don't understand the creative process, I listen and offer appropriate responses like, "That sounds really frustrating." Or, "What do you think you'll do about that?" Or, "Have you considered talking to your supervisor about the workload distribution?" But I don't get emotionally invested. I don't offer to solve her problems. I don't provide the deep, caring engagement she's accustomed to receiving. I don't spend my evening thinking about her challenges, or researching solutions, or offering to help with networking or skill development. I treat her work stories the same way I treat stories from my coworker Dave about his commute frustrations, or his struggles with his home renovation project, with polite interest, reasonable suggestions, and appropriate sympathy, but without personal investment. She's starting to understand that emotional intimacy isn't something you can just turn on and off like a subscription service. The man who was deeply invested in her happiness, her problems, her dreams, her career development, and her daily experiences was in love with her. The roommate is pleasant, helpful when asked, and generally supportive, but ultimately detached from outcomes that don't directly affect him. 2 weeks ago, she tried a different approach. She came home from drinks with her design friends and knocked on my bedroom door around 10 p.m. We'd started sleeping in separate rooms 3 weeks into the protocol, another obvious optimization since roommates don't typically share beds. Ryan, can we talk? I opened the door. She was standing there wearing one of my old engineering conference t-shirts that she used to sleep in, looking vulnerable and slightly desperate. I miss talking to you, she said. Really talking, like we used to. We talk every day, I pointed out. Not like this. Not like... She struggled to find words. Not like when you actually cared about what I was saying. I do care, I said honestly. I care about you the way I care about all my friends. I want you to be happy and successful in your work and your relationships. That's not what I mean. I know, I said gently, but that's the level of care that's available now. You told me you weren't in love with me, so I adjusted my emotional investment to match yours. It's more balanced this way. We both care about each other as friends and roommates. She looked like I just explained a complex mathematical proof that demonstrated her entire worldview was based on incorrect assumptions. What if I was wrong, she whispered. What if I made a mistake? I considered this seriously, the way I'd analyze any hypothetical scenario a client might present during strategy sessions. That's certainly possible, I agreed. People reassess their feelings and change their minds about relationships all the time, but emotional systems aren't like software. You can't just roll back to a previous version after you fundamentally altered the architecture. What does that mean? It means that trust, once broken, requires significant time and consistent effort to rebuild. Love, once withdrawn, doesn't just resume on command. You need to demonstrate consistently over an extended period that your feelings had genuinely changed. And even then, there would be no guarantee that I could return to my previous emotional state. I was giving her a technical analysis of relationship recovery protocols. It was honest, accurate, and completely devoid of the hope or reassurance she was looking for. She just stood there, processing this information like a computer trying to run software that required more memory than was available. How long would that take? She asked finally. I don't know, I said. I've never run that particular experiment. But based on similar systems, I'd estimate it would require at least 6 months of consistent demonstration before any assessment of viability could be made. And that's assuming optimal conditions. She went back to her room. I could hear her crying through the wall for about an hour, which I found unfortunate, but not particularly surprising. Change management is always difficult, especially when people realize the full implications of decisions they made without considering all variables. The next morning, she was back to trying various approaches to provoke some kind of emotional reaction from me. She left dishes in the sink longer than usual, played music louder than normal, forgot to buy toilet paper when it was her turn. Little tests to see if the old Ryan was still accessible somewhere in the system. But the protocol holds. I remain consistently pleasant, helpful when appropriate, and completely unmoved by manipulation attempts. She's beginning to realize that she didn't just end our romantic relationship. She eliminated my capacity to be hurt, frustrated, or emotionally manipulated by her. And without that vulnerability, all her standard influence strategies are useless. The system is working exactly as designed, with efficiency levels that continue to exceed initial projections. Update 3. The Breaking Point Protocol. 6 weeks into the optimization process, and Jessica has entered what I can only describe as the panic phase of her strategy. What started as confident boundary setting has evolved into increasingly desperate attempts to restore the previous system configuration. The first major escalation occurred last Tuesday evening. I came home from my client dinner with the Transportation Authority to find Jessica sitting at our kitchen table with what appeared to be a carefully staged emotional breakdown in progress. She had tissues scattered around her, her laptop open to what looked like job applications, and several bills spread out in front of her like evidence in a court case. I can't do this anymore, she announced the moment I walked through the door. I set down my briefcase and gave her my attention. What specifically are you having trouble with? All of it, she gestured at the papers. The bills, the job stress, managing everything by myself. I feel like I'm drowning. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, the way I would with any roommate who was dealing with life challenges. That sounds overwhelming, I said with genuine sympathy. What's the most pressing issue right now? My freelance work is drying up. 3 of my biggest clients have cut their marketing budgets, and I'm barely making half of what I was earning 2 months ago. That's tough, I agreed. The creative industry can be really volatile. Have you considered diversifying your income streams or looking into more stable employment options? She looked at me like I completely missed the point of the conversation. I thought maybe we could. I was hoping. She trailed off, clearly struggling with how to ask for what she wanted. What were you hoping? I asked patiently. That maybe we could go back to how we used to handle expenses, just temporarily, until I get back on my feet. There it was. She wanted to revert to the previous financial arrangement without reverting to the previous emotional arrangement. She wanted the boyfriend's wallet with the roommate's obligations. I understand that would make things easier for you financially, I said. But that system was designed around shared goals and mutual emotional investment. Since we're no longer operating under those parameters, it makes more sense for each of us to manage our own financial responsibilities. But I can't afford to live here without your help. That's valuable information for your decision-making process, I replied. You might want to consider finding a place that better fits your current budget, or maybe getting a roommate who can split costs more evenly. You are my roommate. Right, and I pay my half of the shared expenses, but I'm not responsible for subsidizing your lifestyle choices or career challenges. The look of complete shock on her face was remarkable. For 3 years, my income had functioned as a safety net that she'd never had to consciously think about. Now she was discovering that safety nets don't exist without someone choosing to provide them. She tried a different approach the following weekend. On Saturday morning, I was in my home office working on a process optimization proposal when she appeared in the doorway wearing a sundress I'd bought her for her last birthday, a detail I noted but didn't react to. "It's such a beautiful day," she said. "I was thinking we could drive out to Hood River, maybe do some hiking, get lunch at that place with the view we used to love." "That sounds like a nice day," I agreed. "Have fun." I meant together. "Oh," I said, looking back at my laptop screen. "I'm planning to finish this proposal today and then hit the gym, but you should definitely go if the weather's good. Hood River is beautiful this time of year. We used to do things like that together." "We did," I acknowledged, "when we were dating. But since you're not interested in that type of relationship anymore, I assumed you prefer to make your own recreation plans." She stood there for a long moment, clearly trying to figure out how to navigate this logic. What if I wanted to try dating again? Like, what if we went on a date? I turned to give her my full attention. "Are you saying you'd like to explore the possibility of rebuilding a romantic relationship?" "Yes," she said quickly. "Maybe. I think so." "Okay," I said. "That would require a significant shift from the current arrangement. If you're seriously interested in that possibility, we should probably have a structured conversation about expectations, timelines, and success metrics." Success metrics? Well, yes. If we're going to experiment with dating again, we'd need to establish clear parameters. How would we measure whether it was working? What behaviors or changes would indicate genuine interest versus just missing the convenience of the previous arrangement? I wasn't being deliberately clinical. I was applying the same analytical approach I'd use for any major system change. "I don't know," she said. "Can't we just see how it feels?" "Feelings aren't reliable data points for this type of decision," I replied. "They're too variable and subject to external factors. We need more concrete indicators." She left without going to Hood River. The most dramatic escalation occurred last week, and it demonstrated just how little she had understood about the system she dismantled. Jessica came home from what she later told me was a girls' night where she'd been getting advice from her friends about our situation. She was slightly drunk and had apparently been coached on a seduction strategy. She knocked on my bedroom door around 11 p.m., wearing nothing but one of my old button-down shirts, hair messy in that carefully calculated way, with what she probably thought was a sultry expression. "I miss you," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "I miss us." I put my book down and looked at her with the same professional courtesy I'd show a client who was making an inappropriate request during a business meeting. "It sounds like you're having some difficult emotions about the changes in our living situation," I said. "That's completely understandable. Major transitions are always challenging." She stepped into my room. "Don't you miss me? Don't you miss how we used to be together?" "I miss certain aspects of the previous arrangement," I said honestly. "But nostalgia isn't a good basis for making decisions about future relationships." She sat on the edge of my bed, clearly expecting this proximity to trigger some kind of emotional or physical response. "We were happy," she said, her voice soft and vulnerable. "We were so happy together." "You were happy," I corrected gently. "You were happy receiving love without reciprocating it. I was providing a service that you found beneficial, but that's not the same thing as being happy together." "That's not true." "Isn't it, though? If you were happy with me, why did you tell me you weren't in love with me anymore?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. She was finally being forced to confront the logic of her own choices. "I made a mistake," she said finally. "Maybe you did," I agreed. "But mistakes have consequences, and one of the consequences of telling someone you don't love them is that they adjust their behavior accordingly." "But what if I love you now?" "Do you?" I asked directly. Another long pause. "I think so," she whispered. "That's not the same thing as knowing so," I pointed out. "And even if you did love me now, that doesn't automatically restore the system to its previous state. Trust and emotional investment, once damaged, require time and consistent evidence to repair." I could see her processing this, trying to understand why her seduction attempt had turned into a systems analysis discussion. How do I prove it to you? She asked. That's not my problem to solve, I replied. If you genuinely want to rebuild a romantic relationship, you need to figure out how to demonstrate that. But I should warn you that I'm not the same person I was 6 weeks ago. The man who was in love with you doesn't exist anymore. What do you mean? I mean that I've optimized myself out of the vulnerability that made love possible. I can't be hurt by you anymore, which means I also can't be deeply affected by you anymore. You killed my capacity to love you when you told me you didn't love me. She stared at me for a long time, tears forming in her eyes. So there's no way back? I didn't say that. But any path forward would require building something entirely new, not restoring something that's been permanently deleted. She left my room quietly, and I could hear her crying in her bedroom for most of the night. The next morning, she was back to normal roommate interactions, but I could see the desperation building. She was finally understanding that she hadn't just changed our relationship. She had fundamentally altered me. And the new version of me was immune to the manipulation strategies that had worked on the old version. Final update: system termination and data analysis. 3 months. That's how long it took for Jessica's brilliant relationship optimization strategy to completely collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. The lease on our Pearl District apartment expires in 1 week, and Jessica has been avoiding the renewal paperwork like it's a court summons. Meanwhile, I finalized the lease on my new place 2 weeks ago, a sleek 1-bedroom loft in South Waterfront with floor-to-ceiling windows, in-unit laundry, and a view of the river that makes my engineering heart happy with its clean lines and efficient design. Last night, I came home from my Thursday evening rock climbing session at Planet Granite to find Jessica sitting at our dining table, staring at the lease renewal documents like they contained instructions for defusing a nuclear device. "We need to discuss this," she said without looking up, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had finally run out of alternative strategies. "Absolutely," I replied, setting down my gear bag. "What specifically did you want to discuss?" "Are we signing this lease renewal?" "I'm not," I said matter-of-factly. "I've already signed a lease on a place in South Waterfront. My move-in date is Saturday." The color drained from her face so quickly I was briefly concerned about her blood pressure. "What? When did you do that?" "I submitted the application 3 weeks ago and signed the lease last Tuesday. I found a space that better aligns with my current lifestyle and financial optimization goals. It's a 12-minute walk to my office and has an excellent home gym set up." She just stared at me, and I could see her brain trying to process this information while simultaneously calculating rent costs, security deposits, and her monthly income. "You're leaving me?" "I'm relocating to more suitable housing," I corrected. "You're welcome to renew this lease if it fits your budget, or find alternative arrangements that work better for your financial situation. I assumed you'd want to make your own housing decisions as an independent adult." That's when 3 months of suppressed panic and mounting financial pressure finally erupted in a spectacular display of emotional overflow. "This isn't fair," she shouted, standing up so abruptly that her chair toppled backward with a crash. "You're punishing me. You're being deliberately cruel." I remained seated, hands folded, giving her my complete attention the way I would during any client meeting where someone was having an emotional response to data they didn't want to accept. "I'm not punishing you, Jessica," I said calmly. "I'm making practical decisions based on the parameters you established 3 months ago." "I told you I made a mistake. I told you I was wrong about everything." "Actually, no," I said, consulting my mental records. "You told me you missed talking to me. You asked what if you were wrong. You said you thought you might love me, but you never explicitly stated that you were wrong, and you definitely never said you were actually in love with me." "I'm saying it now." "Are you, though?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. The words were right there, but something was preventing her from saying them. And we both knew exactly what that something was. She didn't love me. She loved the lifestyle I had provided. She loved the security, the financial stability, the emotional support, and the general convenience of having someone completely devoted to her happiness. She loved having a service provider who required no reciprocal payment. She loved the benefits, not the person providing them. "You want the experience of being loved," I continued, "without the obligation of loving back. You want a relationship where you receive unconditional support, financial security, and emotional care while providing only whatever level of affection feels convenient to you at any given moment." "That's not." "It is, though," I interrupted gently. 3 months ago, you told me you weren't in love with me, but wanted to maintain our living situation and relationship structure. You wanted me to continue functioning as your devoted boyfriend while you operated as my casual roommate. When I optimized the arrangement to reflect those actual parameters, you discovered it wasn't what you wanted after all. I stood up and walked over to the kitchen counter, where a small package had been sitting since it was delivered that afternoon. "Now you want to revert to the previous system, but only because you've realized how much work it is to be responsible for your own emotional and financial well-being. You don't want me, Jessica. You want the lifestyle I provided when I was in love with you. I opened the package and pulled out a single key on a simple keychain, brushed steel with clean lines, exactly the kind of minimalist design that appealed to my engineering aesthetic. This is the key to my new apartment, I said, holding it up for her to see. It's 850 square feet, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, in-unit laundry, and a view of the Willamette River. Just enough space for one person who values efficiency and independence. The symbolism was precise and unmistakable. She'd been expecting, hoping for, some grand romantic gesture, some proof that this had all been an elaborate strategy to win her back, some indication that the old Ryan was still accessible somewhere in the system. Instead, I was showing her the key to my future without her. She sank back into her chair, and for the first time in 3 months, I saw genuine understanding dawn in her eyes. "You're really done with me," she said quietly. "I adapted to the relationship parameters you requested," I replied. "You wanted someone who wasn't in love with you. Mission accomplished, permanently." "What if I fought for you?" she asked desperately. "What if I proved that I really do love you? What if I did everything right from now on?" I considered this question with the same analytical approach I'd apply to any complex problem requiring systematic evaluation. "Let's walk through that scenario," I said, pulling out a chair and sitting back down. "You need to demonstrate through consistent actions over an extended period that you had genuinely developed romantic feelings for me. Not panic about losing your comfortable lifestyle, but actual love." "Yes," she said eagerly, leaning forward. "I could do that. I would do that. But here's the fundamental issue with that recovery plan," I continued. "Even if you could prove your feelings were genuine, which would be difficult given the current context and your financial motivations, you'd be trying to rebuild a relationship with someone who is no longer emotionally available to you." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the part of me that was capable of being in love with you was permanently damaged when you told me you weren't in love with me. That wasn't a choice I made to be vindictive. It's just how the system responded to protect itself from further damage." I paused to make sure she was following the logic. You can't rebuild a relationship with someone who no longer has the capacity to love you back. And I don't have that capacity anymore, because I've learned not to trust you with my emotional vulnerability. She was crying now, but quietly, the way people cry when they finally understand something they've been refusing to see. "So there's nothing I can do? No way to fix this?" "You can learn from this experience," I said gently. "You can use this data to build better relationships in the future with people who haven't been immunized against your particular manipulation strategies. Just not with me." "I wasn't trying to manipulate you." "Maybe not consciously," I agreed. "But that's what it was. You wanted to renegotiate the terms of our relationship entirely in your favor, keeping all the benefits while eliminating your obligations. When I gave you exactly what you asked for, you realized it wasn't actually what you wanted." I stood up and walked toward my office to continue packing. The problem is that relationships aren't subscription services where you can upgrade or downgrade features at will. When you told me you didn't love me, you didn't just change our relationship status, you changed me. And the new version of me is completely immune to the strategies that worked on the old version. She sat there at the table, surrounded by lease documents she couldn't afford, and facing a future she wasn't prepared for, finally understanding the full implications of her decision. That evening, I could hear her making phone calls through the wall, first to her parents, then to various friends. The conversations followed a predictable pattern: initial sympathy, followed by practical questions about her finances and job situation, followed by polite suggestions that she might want to consider moving back home to Beaverton or finding a cheaper place with multiple roommates. None of her friends offered to let her move in with them. None of them volunteered to help with her rent. The same people who had called her brave and honest for her relationship decision were remarkably unavailable when it came to dealing with the consequences of that decision. By midnight, the phone calls had stopped, and I could hear her crying again. But this time it sounded different. Not the manipulative tears she'd used to try to provoke a response from me, but the genuine grief of someone who had finally realized what they'd lost and why they'd lost it. The next morning, she was gone before I woke up. Her car wasn't in the parking lot, and most of her immediate belongings had been hastily packed and removed. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "Ryan, I'm staying with my parents for a few days to figure things out. I know you probably won't believe me, but I really am sorry. I thought I was being honest about my feelings, but I think I was just scared of how much I depended on you. I wanted to keep all the good parts without having to be vulnerable. I see now how selfish that was. I hope you're happy in your new place. You deserve someone who appreciates what you have to offer." It was probably the most honest communication she'd given me in months. I spent the day finishing my packing and coordinating the logistics of my move. My new landlord had agreed to let me access the apartment early for moving purposes, and I'd hired professional movers to handle the furniture I was taking. Jessica returned that evening with her parents' SUV and her father, who helped her load the rest of her belongings while studiously avoiding eye contact with me. Her mother came up to the apartment briefly to collect some items from the bathroom and kitchen. "You know, she really does care about you," her mother said while packing Jessica's specialty teas and supplements. "I'm sure she does," I replied politely. "The way anyone cares about losing something that made their life easier." Her mother looked like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the right words. Jessica herself said goodbye with awkward formality, like we were co-workers who had finished a project together. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," I replied. "Good luck with everything." And that was it. 3 years of shared life reduced to a polite exchange between strangers. Epilogue. 6 months post-optimization. For those who've been following this process, I've been in my South Waterfront loft for 6 months now, and the optimization has exceeded all initial projections. The space is exactly what I needed. Clean, efficient, and entirely my own. Floor-to-ceiling windows provide excellent natural light for my home office setup, and the building's amenities include a fitness center that's eliminated my need for a separate gym membership. The location puts me within walking distance of work, which has improved both my productivity and my work-life balance metrics. I've heard through mutual acquaintances that Jessica moved back in with her parents in Beaverton and is working at a marketing agency downtown, a stable job with benefits and a predictable salary, which seems like a much better fit for her financial planning needs. She's apparently dating someone new, a guy she met through her yoga studio, who friends describe as very emotional and expressive, which sounds like exactly the kind of high emotional investment partner she should have been looking for all along. As for me, I've been focusing on growing my consulting practice, the skills I developed during the roommate optimization protocol, particularly the ability to maintain professional detachment while dealing with emotional manipulation, have made me significantly more effective at helping organizations navigate change management challenges. I've expanded into relationship consulting for businesses, helping companies optimize their vendor relationships and internal communication protocols. I've also been dating, though with a much more systematic approach than before. I now treat romantic relationships like any other system that requires careful evaluation and maintenance. I'm more selective about emotional investment, clearer about expectations and boundaries, and better at identifying compatibility issues early in the process. It's interesting how learning that love is conditional and revocable changes your entire approach to relationships. It doesn't make you cynical, it makes you more careful about where you invest your resources. Last month, I ran into Jessica at Powell's Books downtown. She was with her new boyfriend, a tall, bearded guy wearing multiple layers of flannel who spent the entire brief conversation discussing his feelings about the gentrification of Southeast Portland. Jessica looked good, happier, or at least more settled than she'd been during our final months together. She asked about my work and my apartment, and I told her about the business expansion and my new dating approach. "That sounds really methodical," she said with a slight smile. "It is," I agreed. "I've learned that emotional decisions tend to produce suboptimal outcomes." Her boyfriend looked confused by our interaction, clearly sensing there was history, but unable to decode the polite, professional way we were discussing it. Jessica didn't explain, and I didn't provide context. We parted ways cordially, like former colleagues who had collaborated on a successful project and maintained mutual respect despite no longer working together, which, when I analyze it objectively, is exactly what we were. She had presented me with a problem. She wanted the benefits of love without reciprocating it. I had solved that problem by optimizing both the benefits and the love out of the system. She got exactly what she asked for, and I learned valuable lessons about resource allocation and system vulnerabilities. The process was painful for both of us, but it was also necessary. Sometimes the best optimization requires completely shutting down the existing system and building something new with better parameters. Jessica learned that relationships require mutual emotional investment and that lifestyle benefits don't exist independently from the feelings that generate them. I learned that love, while powerful, is also a choice that can be revoked, and that protecting yourself from that vulnerability requires systematic emotional boundaries. We both got exactly what we asked for. It just took us a while to realize we should have been more careful about what we were asking for. The system worked perfectly.